The stars at the edge of the frontier burned cold and ancient. War Commander Krelvan stood at the observation deck of his flagship, the Dawnbreaker, watching the void with four eyes that had witnessed the fall of civilizations. His reflection stared back from the reinforced transparasteel violet skin marked with the silver scars of 8 conquest campaigns' mandibles that curved like ceremonial blades and eyes arranged in a pattern that let him see in spectrums these humans probably couldn't even imagine. 8 campaigns, 8 victories. The Valkyrie hegemony had expanded its territory by 47 star systems under his command. He was old enough to remember when the hegemony was just 3 species clinging to survival. Now they were 6 bound together by strength and the certainty that in this galaxy you either expanded or you were consumed. The frontier sector stretched before him like an untouched meal. 3 weeks of scouting had revealed what the intelligence division suspected: this region was ripe. Mineral-rich worlds strategically positioned and defended by a species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. Humans. Krelvan had read the files. They had made first contact with the Galactic community 43 years ago, a young species optimistic, eager to make friends. They had built colonies on 12 worlds in this sector, each one a perfect target. Their technology was functional but unremarkable. Their military doctrine emphasized peacekeeping and exploration. Their ships were designed for science missions and freight transport with weapons that seemed almost apologetic. Perfect prey. A chirp from his communicator interrupted his thoughts. Sub-Commander Thane's voice carried the sharp efficiency of youth. War Commander, contact. Single vessel bearing 147 Mark 6. Human configuration. Krelvan's secondary eyes focused on the tactical display that materialized before him. A single ship, small alone. The scanner data resolved into a 3-dimensional projection, a destroyer-class vessel, maybe 300 meters long, with the clean lines and minimal armor plating that marked it as a patrol ship rather than a warship. Its hull bore the designation UHSF Vigilant in the peculiar angular script humans favored. Distance, Krelvan asked. 200,000 kilometers. They're on a standard patrol vector. Sensors indicate they haven't detected us yet. Of course they hadn't. The Dawnbreaker's stealth systems were Valkyrie military grade, designed for exactly this kind of approach. Krelvan studied the human ship with the practiced eye of a hunter. It was small enough to be isolated, large enough to carry valuable intelligence, and perfectly positioned to send a message. Maintain stealth. Begin passive scanning. I want to know everything about that ship before we reveal ourselves. The next 6 hours passed in methodical observation. Krelvan stood in the operations center watching as his intelligence officers dissected the Vigilant with invisible fingers. Passive scans were an art form. They listened without speaking, watched without being seen, learned without alerting the prey. The data accumulated in layers. The ship's reactor output indicated a power system that was efficient but limited. 72 crew members based on life support readings. Weapons systems that included basic kinetic cannons and what appeared to be short-range missiles. Defensive shields that could probably withstand asteroid impacts but not sustained military fire. The architecture told its own story. The Vigilant was designed for long-duration patrols in safe space. It had enlarged crew quarters, an oversized medical bay, and what looked like a hydroponics section. This wasn't a warship. It was a mobile outpost built for comfort and endurance rather than combat. Analysis, Krelvan ordered. His chief intelligence officer, a methodical being named Vrax, manipulated the holographic display. The design philosophy is consistent with their documented doctrine, War Commander. Defensive posture, emphasis on crew welfare, minimal offensive capability. Their power distribution shows 70% allocated to propulsion and life support, only 15% to weapons. Compared to our standard, our destroyers allocate 40% to weapon systems. This vessel is, Vrax paused, searching for the right word, gentle. Krelvan felt something cold settle in his chest, not quite pity, something closer to contempt. These humans had been given the gift of faster-than-light travel, had been welcomed into a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, and they had built ships like floating hotels. They didn't understand. In the real galaxy, the one beyond their protected little bubble gentleness was just another word for weakness. What about their sensor capability? Krelvan asked. Rudimentary. They're using standard electromagnetic sweeps, nothing exotic. If we maintain current stealth protocols, they won't detect us unless we're within 10,000 kilometers. And their captain, Vrax pulled up a personnel file that the passive scan had extracted from the ship's public database. A human face appeared in the hologram female with dark hair pulled back and a severe style eyes that looked tired even in an official portrait. Captain Lyra Strand, age 39 standard years, 12 years of service. Previous assignments include border patrol, first contact support, and humanitarian relief operations. No combat experience. Commendations for diplomatic service and crew welfare. A bureaucrat playing soldier. Krelvan studied the face, memorizing it. In his experience, officers like this crumbled when faced with real pressure. They had been trained for negotiation and compromise, not for the brutal calculus of survival. Bring us out of stealth, Krelvan ordered. Position the Dawnbreaker at 90,000 kilometers. I want them to see us, but I want them to see us as untouchable. The bridge crew moved with the precision of a well-trained orchestra. The Dawnbreaker dropped its stealth field, becoming suddenly visible in the electromagnetic spectrum. At this range, they would appear on the vigilance sensors as a massive presence, a ship 5 times their size, armed and ominous. Krelvan watched the human ship on his display, waiting for the moment of recognition. It took 47 seconds. The vigilance engines flared as they executed a sudden deceleration. Their sensor arrays swiveled toward the Dawnbreaker, scanning frantically. Now they knew they weren't alone. Hail them, Krelvan said. Standard diplomatic protocols. Let's see if they're as reasonable as their files suggest. The communication officer worked the controls. After a moment, the main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Vigilant. Captain Lyra Strand sat in the command chair, and Krelvan's first thought was that she looked exactly like her file photo. Tired, professional, controlled. Behind her, he could see her bridge crew at their stations, humans of various ages and builds, all wearing the same dark blue uniforms. They look so fragile. This is Captain Lyra Strand of the United Human Space Forces destroyer Vigilant. She said, her voice steady despite what must have been considerable surprise. You've appeared in monitored space without prior notification. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Krelvan allowed himself a moment to appreciate her composure. Fear could make being stupid, but this human was maintaining protocol even in the face of the unknown. That suggested intelligence, if not strength. He activated his own transmission. The translator would render his words in the human language, stripping away the harmonic undertones of proper Velkari speech. But the meaning would be clear enough. I am War Commander Krelvan of the Velkari Hegemony. Your presence in this sector has been noted and evaluated. The hegemony extends an offer of protection to your species. Submit to our authority and you will be incorporated into our sphere of security. It was the standard opening. Polite, almost generous. The language of protection rather than conquest. Most species accepted when faced with overwhelming force. Those who didn't, well, that was why he was called a war commander rather than a diplomat. Strand's expression didn't change, but Krelvan saw her exchange a glance with one of her officers, a young male with nervous hands. War Commander Humanity operates under the terms of the Galactic Sovereignty Act. This sector was registered to human settlement 17 years ago. We appreciate your offer, but we maintain our own security arrangements. The Galactic Sovereignty Act. Krelvan had heard of it. A piece of bureaucratic fiction maintained by species who still believed the galaxy operated on laws rather than strength. It had about as much real power as a prayer. Captain Strand, Krelvan said, letting his voice carry the weight of patient authority. Sovereignty requires the strength to defend it. Your species is young, your military is modest. The hegemony can provide protection that you cannot provide for yourselves. We have no need for protection, Commander. These are peaceful systems. Peaceful systems attract predators, Captain. Surely you understand this. Strand leaned forward slightly, her tired eyes focusing on him with unexpected intensity. What I understand, Commander, is that you've entered our territory without permission and are attempting to coerce us into submission. That's not protection. That's conquest with a diplomatic mask. Krelvan felt a flicker of surprise. This human had more spine than her file suggested, but spine without strength was just stubbornness, and stubbornness could be broken. You misunderstand your position, Krelvan said. Allow me to clarify. He gestured to his weapons officer. Initiate deep scan. I want a complete analysis of their vessel. Show Captain Strand what real military capability looks like. The deep scan was not an act of observation. It was an act of violation, where passive scanning listened from a distance. Deep scanning penetrated. It sent focused beams of exotic particles through hull plating, through shielding, through the very molecular structure of the target ship. It read reactor temperatures, weapon capacities, structural weaknesses. It was the equivalent of someone walking through your home, opening every drawer, reading every private document while you stood helpless to stop them. Under Galactic convention, a deep scanning without permission was classified as an act of aggression. It was the kind of thing that started wars between equal powers. But Krelvin and Strand were not equals. On his tactical display, the Vigilant began to light up in layers of invasive detail. He could see the reactor core pulsing at its center, the weapon systems arrayed along its hull, the crew quarters where 72 humans lived and worked. He could read the efficiency ratings of their engines, the chemical composition of their hull plating, the exact frequency of their defensive shields. They were utterly transparent to him. On the view screen, Strand's composure finally cracked. Her jaw tightened. Commander, you are in violation of... I am in violation of nothing, Captain. I am simply gathering information. Information that will help me understand whether your species requires gentle persuasion or a more direct approach. The scan completed. Vrax transmitted the analysis to Krelvan's command console, and he absorbed it in seconds. Everything the passive scan had suggested was confirmed. The Vigilant was a peaceful ship pretending to be a warship. Its weapons were adequate for deterring pirates, but worthless against military-grade opposition. Its shields could be overwhelmed in minutes. Its reactor couldn't sustain full combat power for more than an hour. It was a ship built by a species that had forgotten what real danger felt like. Thank you for your cooperation, Captain M, Krelvan said. Your bomb vessel's capabilities have been thoroughly documented. Now let me be clear about the situation you face. He brought up a holographic map of the sector highlighting the 12 human colonies. These worlds exist because the galaxy has been peaceful. That peace is maintained by strength. Your strength is insufficient. Therefore, your peace is an illusion. We've maintained our colonies for 17 years without incident, Strand said, because no one has challenged you until now. Krelvan let that sink in. I am authorized to offer you a choice. Submit to hegemony protection. Pay tribute. Accept our governance. In return, your colonies will be defended, your people will be safe, and your species will have a place in the new order we are building. And if we refuse, then I will demonstrate what refusal costs. Krelvan gestured again, and his weapons officer activated the ion pulse system. It was a beautiful piece of technology designed for exactly this kind of demonstration. Unlike kinetic weapons that destroyed or energy weapons that burned, the ion pulse simply stopped things. A focused beam of charged particles tuned to disrupt electronic systems and overload power conduits. Non-lethal, reversible, but absolutely devastating to any ship dependent on technology, which meant every ship in the galaxy. The beam lanced out from the Dawnbreaker's forward array, invisible to the naked eye, but brilliant in the electromagnetic spectrum. It struck the Vigilant amidships, and Krelvan watched with professional satisfaction as the human ship's lights died. All of them, bridge lights running out, engine glow, everything. The Vigilant went dark in an instant, transforming from a functioning vessel into a dead metal shell, drifting in the void. Inside that ship, 72 humans would be experiencing sudden darkness, failing life support, the terrifying awareness that their technology had betrayed them. Emergency systems would activate, bathing everything in dim red light, giving them just enough illumination to see how helpless they were. It was a lesson every species needed to learn. Your technology serves you only until someone stronger decides otherwise. Krelvan waited 30 seconds, letting the lesson sink in, then had his weapons officer reverse the pulse. Power surged back into the Vigilant. Lights flickered on. Systems rebooted. On the view screen, Strand's bridge crew scrambled to restore their stations, their faces pale with the specific terror of sudden technological failure. But Strand herself remained in her command chair, her eyes locked on Krelvan. She looked angry now, which was good. Anger was better than fear. Anger made beings make mistakes. That was a warning, Captain, Krelvan said. Your ship is vulnerable. Your weapons are inadequate. Your shields are irrelevant. I could destroy you in seconds, but I choose not to. That choice is an act of mercy. Strand's hands gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. When she spoke, her voice was tight with a controlled rage. You violated our sovereignty. You assaulted our vessel. You've committed acts of war. A war requires two sides with comparable strength, Captain. This is not war. This is education. Krelvan pulled up the sector map again, highlighting all 12 colonies. I am broadcasting this conversation to every human settlement in this region. They need to hear what I'm about to tell you because their survival depends on their response. He took a breath, letting his four eyes focus on Strand's face, making sure she understood the absolute seriousness of what came next. Humanity has 96 hours to evacuate these 12 worlds. Every human presence must be withdrawn. All territorial claims must be surrendered. These systems now belong to the Valkyrie hegemony. If you comply, there will be no further violence. If you resist, he gestured at the Vigilance, darkened systems still rebooting from the ion pulse. You have seen what resistance accomplishes. Your ships are children's toys. Your weapons are irrelevant. Your bravery is admirable but meaningless. Evacuate or I will cleanse these worlds of human presence by force. Those are your options. The bridge of the Vigilant was silent. Krelvan could see the crew looking to their captain, waiting for her response. This was the moment where most species broke, where the reality of their weakness became undeniable, and they chose survival over pride. Captain Lyra Strand straightened in her chair. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. 96 hours, she said slowly. You're giving us 96 hours to evacuate 12 colonies, 30,000 people. That's quite generous, Commander. It is sufficient time if your people are motivated. Oh, we're motivated. Strand's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Let me ask you something, War Commander. That deep scan you ran on my ship, you think you learned everything about us? Krelvan felt the first whisper of unease. There was something in her tone, a confidence, that didn't match her situation. I learned that your technology is 80 years behind Galactic standard. I learned that your weapons are designed for deterrence rather than destruction. I learned that you are not equipped for real warfare. You learned what we let you learn. Strand leaned back in her chair, and now her expression was definitely a smile. A cold one, a knowing one. You scanned the Vigilant. You analyzed our systems. You cataloged our weaknesses. But Commander, you should have scanned deeper. Explain yourself. 96 hours. We'll evacuate. We'll comply with your ultimatum. The smile widened. And then, War Commander Krelvan, you're going to learn what humanity looks like when we stop being polite. Before Krelvan could respond, the transmission cut. The view screen showed the Vigilant turning away its engines, flaring to life as it began moving toward the nearest jump point, running away as he'd expected. But that smile, that knowing, confident smile. Sub-Commander Thane, Krelvan said slowly, review the deep scan data, every detail. I want to know if we missed anything. Thane worked her console for several minutes, pulling up the layers of analysis. Finally, she looked up confused. War Commander, the scan was complete. We have full technical specifications. There's nothing hidden. The ship is exactly what it appears to be, a patrol destroyer with minimal offensive capability. Then why was she smiling? Perhaps bluffing humans are known to employ deception when threatened. That should have been the answer. It was the logical answer. Captain Strand was trying to save face to maintain some dignity in the face of overwhelming force. Her parting words were just the empty defiance of the defeated. But Krelvan had fought 8 campaigns. He had faced dozens of species, hundreds of captains, thousands of soldiers. He knew the difference between the bluff of the desperate and the confidence of the prepared. Strand's smile had been the latter. Broadcast the ultimatum to all human colonies, Krelvan ordered. 96 hours, full evacuation, monitor all communications to traffic. I want to know how Earth responds to this. Yes, War Commander. Krelvan walked back to the observation deck staring out at the stars. The Vigilant was already gone, jumped away to wherever humans went when they retreated. The sector was quiet again, peaceful, full of the resources the hegemony would soon claim. It should have felt like victory. It was victory. So why did he feel like he'd just made a terrible mistake? He thought about the deep scan, about the layers of data they'd collected. The Vigilance reactor was efficient but limited. Its weapons were minimal. Its shields were adequate. Everything about it screamed peaceful exploration, scientific curiosity, reluctant defense. 80 years behind Galactic standard, Vrax had said. But what if that wasn't incompetence? What if it was a choice? The Valkyrie had encountered species before who deliberately limited themselves. Religious prohibitions against certain technologies. Cultural taboos about weapons of mass destruction. Philosophical commitments to peaceful existence. Those species usually died when real predators found them. But Strand hadn't acted like someone from a dying civilization. She had acted like someone who knew a secret. You should have scanned deeper. What did that mean? They had scanned every system, analyzed every component, documented every weakness. What could possibly be deeper than a complete technical analysis? Unless the weakness itself was the deception. Krelvan activated his communicator connecting to the intelligence division. I want comprehensive analysis of human military history, not just their space force, everything. How they fought on their homeworld, how they developed their weapons, how they approached conflict before they reached the stars. War Commander, we have files on Aforma, I want more than files, I want understanding. These humans chose to build gentle ships. Wait, what are they hiding behind that gentleness? There was a pause. We'll compile a full report, sir. It will take several hours. You have 96 hours. Use them. Krelvan cut the connection and returned his attention to the void. Somewhere out there, Lyra Strand was carrying his ultimatum to her superiors on Earth. They would panic. They would scramble. They would evacuate because they had no other choice. That was how this always went. But her smile lingered in his memory, sharp and knowing, like the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. And for the first time in 8 campaigns, War Commander Krelvan wondered if he had underestimated his enemy. The stars burned cold and distant, keeping their secrets. And somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity was preparing its response. The response from Earth came in 18 hours. Krelvan had expected panic, desperate negotiations, pleas for more time. What he got instead was a terse message from someone called Secretary General Martinez, informing the Valkyrie hegemony that humanity would comply with the evacuation order and requesting that Valkyrie forces maintain a minimum distance of 1 million kilometers from colony worlds during the withdrawal process. No outrage, no threats, just cold bureaucratic acknowledgement. It felt wrong. They're accepting defeat too easily, Thane said, studying the message on her console. The young sub-commander had been reviewing human communication intercepts for the past 6 hours, looking for signs of resistance planning or military mobilization. Species with 12 established colonies don't just surrender without a fight. Perhaps they understand mathematics, Krelvan replied. 30,000 civilians against our battle fleet. The calculation is simple. But even as he said it, he thought of Captain Strand's smile, that knowing, confident expression that had haunted him through the night cycle. The intelligence report on human military history had arrived an hour ago. Krelvan had read it 3 times each pass, leaving him more unsettled. Humans had a complicated relationship with warfare. They were good at it, disturbingly good. Their homeworld's history was a catalog of increasingly sophisticated methods of killing each other, spanning thousands of years, and culminating in weapons that could render their entire planet uninhabitable. But when they reached the stars and encountered other species, something changed. Their warships became exploration vessels. Their weapons became defensive. They adopted something called the soft power protocol, deliberately limiting their military capability to appear less threatening to the galactic community. The report called it enlightened self-interest, a young species learning to coexist peacefully. Krelvan called it camouflage. The first evacuation ships are arriving at Kepler 7, his navigation officer reported. Count is 180 vessels, mixed configuration. 180 ships in 18 hours. That was impressive logistics, even if they were civilian craft pressed into emergency service. Krelvan brought up the tactical display, watching as icons began populating the space around the largest human colony. Kepler-7 was home to 8,000 humans, making it the crown jewel of their frontier settlements. The planet had breathable atmosphere, abundant water, and mineral deposits that would serve the hegemony for decades. Krelvan had chosen to personally oversee its occupation, bringing the Dawnbreaker and 60 capital ships to ensure there were no complications. Now watching the evacuation fleet assemble, he felt that same wrongness intensifying. "Classification on those vessels?" he asked. The sensor officer worked his console, pulling data from their long-range scans. "Varied War Commander. I'm reading bulk freighters, passenger liners, industrial haulers, medical frigates, construction barges. It looks like they grabbed everything that could make the journey." Desperation. It made sense. When you had 96 hours to evacuate 30,000 people from 12 worlds, you used whatever ships were available. Comfort and elegance were luxuries you couldn't afford. Except, "Bring up visual on that medical frigate," Krelvan ordered, the large one bearing 273. The main view screen zoomed in, enhancing the image until a ship resolved in detail. It was painted white with red cross symbols, the universal sign of medical services. The hull was bulky, designed for carrying large amounts of supplies or personnel. Nothing threatening, nothing military, nothing that should make his veteran instincts scream danger. "Energy signature analysis," Krelvan said quietly. The sensor officer ran the scan and his mandibles twitched in confusion. "That's odd, sir. The power core output is reading much higher than expected for a medical vessel. It's generating enough energy to run a battlecruiser." Explanation: "Perhaps they're running life support for overflow refugees or powering medical equipment." Thane moved to her own console, her young face tense with concentration. "Permission to run detailed scans on the entire fleet, War Commander." "Granted." The Dawnbreaker's sensor arrays focused, sending invisible fingers of electromagnetic analysis across the growing evacuation fleet. Data began streaming in, and Krelvan watched as his crew's confusion turned to unease. 47 vessels showing anomalous power signatures, Thane reported. "They're generating far more energy than their stated function would require." "Could be overloaded reactors," the engineering officer suggested, "pushing their systems beyond safe limits to make the evacuation deadline." It was a reasonable explanation. Humans in a desperate situation, driving their ships too hard, risking reactor failure to save their people. It fit the narrative of a defeated species scrambling to survive. But Krelvan's four eyes tracked across the display, counting those anomalous signatures, measuring their distribution across the fleet. They weren't random. They were evenly dispersed, positioned throughout the evacuation formation in a pattern that looked almost tactical. "Weapons status," Krelvan ordered. "I want firing solutions on every ship showing unusual readings. If they're planning something stupid, I want to be ready." "War Commander, they're civilian vessels," Thane said carefully. "Firing on evacuation ships would violate—" "I know what it would violate, Subcommander. I'm not planning to fire. I'm planning to be prepared." He turned to face her, letting his tone carry the weight of experience. "In 8 campaigns, I've learned that the most dangerous moment is when your enemy appears to surrender. That's when they have nothing left to lose." Thane nodded, chastened, and returned to her console. The evacuation proceeded with disturbing efficiency. Human shuttles descended to Kepler-7's surface, loading colonists in organized groups. No panic, no riots, no desperate refugees fighting for space. Just calm, methodical withdrawal, as if they'd practiced this scenario 1,000 times. Maybe they had. The thought made Krelvan's skin prickle. The intelligence report had mentioned something called continuity of government protocols. Plans for evacuating Earth itself if the planet became uninhabitable. Humans had spent decades preparing for catastrophic scenarios, running drills, building systems to move millions of people in crisis situations. They knew how to run away efficiently, but efficiency in retreat didn't explain Captain Strand's smile. "Evacuation 70% complete," the operations officer reported. "At current rate, they'll be finished in 6 hours." Ahead of schedule. The humans were moving even faster than Krelvan had expected. He should have felt satisfaction. The campaign was proceeding flawlessly. No resistance, No complications, just smooth professional conquest. Instead, he felt like he was watching a carefully choreographed performance waiting for the moment when the actors dropped their masks. Sub-Commander Thane, those anomalous power signatures, are they stable? Thane checked her readings. Yes, sir. Constant output. No fluctuations that would suggest reactor stress. So they're not overloading their systems. No, sir. Whatever they're powering, it's running at optimal efficiency. Medical equipment didn't run at battlecruiser power levels. Life support for refugees didn't require tactical distribution, and desperate civilians didn't evacuate with this kind of precision. Krelvan made a decision. Weapons lock on all vessels showing unusual energy signatures. If I give the order to fire, I want instant response. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, targeting solutions calculated, firing systems armed. On the tactical display, red brackets appeared around 47 ships in the evacuation fleet. And then, as if they'd been waiting for exactly this moment, every single human ship activated jamming. The sensor displays dissolved into static. Targeting locks failed. Communication channels flooded with electromagnetic noise. In an instant, the Dawnbreaker went from hunter to blind predator, striking at shadows. Counter-jamming, Krelvan ordered. Clear those sensors. His crew scrambled, deploying anti-jamming protocols that should have cut through the interference. Should have. But the human jamming was sophisticated, multi-layered, adapting in real time to every countermeasure. As if they'd known exactly what the Velkari would do. As if they'd planned for this. Visual, Krelvan snapped. If sensors are blind, use optical. The main view screen shifted to enhanced visual mode. The evacuation fleet hung in space, 180 vessels in loose formation, and for a moment everything looked normal. Then the first ship began to change. Hull panels along the medical frigate's flanks detached, falling away like shed skin. Beneath the white civilian exterior was something else entirely. Dark armor plating, weapon ports, the angular aggressive lines of military architecture. The medical frigate wasn't a medical frigate, it was a warship wearing a disguise. And it wasn't alone. Across the evacuation fleet, ships began transforming. Bulk freighters dropped their cargo sections to reveal destroyer-class hulls. Passenger liners shed their luxury exteriors to expose weapons arrays. Construction barges, industrial haulers, civilian transports, all of them peeling away their outer shells like insects emerging from cocoons. 180 civilian vessels became maybe 180 warships. Krelvan's blood turned to ice. Battle stations, he said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. All ships combat formation. Prepare for engagement. But even as his fleet scrambled to respond, he knew they were already behind. The humans had positioned their disguised warships perfectly surrounding the Velkari formation during what should have been a harmless evacuation. 60 Velkari capital ships against 180 human warships, and the humans had initiative, surprise, and positions they'd chosen while pretending to be helpless refugees. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was exactly what Krelvan would have done. Incoming fire, the tactical officer shouted. But the expected barrage of missiles and energy weapons didn't come. Instead, the human warships opened their launch bays and released clouds. Thousands of small signatures erupted from each human vessel, filling space with what looked like a swarm of insects. The Dawnbreaker's partially restored sensors struggled to count them. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Drones. Each human warship had deployed 100 autonomous combat drones, and those drones were moving with terrifying coordination. They swarmed toward the Velkari formation like a living tide, shifting and adapting in patterns that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Point defense maximum spread, Krelvan ordered. Don't let them close. The Velkari fleet opened fire, filling space with defensive fire. Energy pulses and kinetic rounds tore through the drone swarm, destroying dozens, hundreds. But for every drone that died, 3 more slipped through the gaps, darting and weaving with impossible precision. They weren't following pre-programmed attack patterns, they were thinking. The first wave hit the Velkari outer screen, and Krelvan watched as 3 of his destroyers died in seconds. The drones swarmed over the shields, finding weak points, exploiting frequencies, delivering precise strikes to critical systems. Engines died. Weapons went offline. Life support failed. The destroyers went dark, crippled, drifting, and the human capital ships hadn't even engaged yet. They hung back beyond weapons range, coordinating their drone swarms through some kind of quantum-entangled communication system. The drones moved as one vast organism, adapting to every Valkyrie countermeasure, learning from every kill, growing more efficient with each passing second. Focus fire on the human capital ships, Krelvan ordered. Ignore the drones, kill the controllers. His fleet pivoted, bringing their heavy weapons to bear on the actual warships. Missiles launched. Energy cannons fired. For a moment, Krelvan thought they might break through. Then the human ships moved. They didn't follow standard evasion protocols. They didn't maintain formation cohesion. Each ship moved independently, irregularly, as if 60 different captains were all making their own decisions in real time without waiting for orders from above. No centralized command structure. No rigid doctrine. Just pure chaotic adaptation. Valkyrie targeting systems designed to predict movement patterns and calculate firing solutions suddenly became worthless. You couldn't predict chaos. The missiles missed. The energy weapons hit empty space, and the drone swarm kept coming. Damage report, Krelvan demanded. 14 ships disabled, 9 more heavily damaged. Point defense ammunition down to 40%. The drones are targeting our weapon systems specifically, sir. They're trying to disarm us. Disarm, not destroy. Even in the middle of battle, the humans were showing restraint. They could have targeted life support, could have gone for kill shots, but instead they were methodically stripping away weapons and engines, leaving ships intact but helpless. It was the kind of precision that required perfect intelligence, perfect understanding of Valkyrie ship design, weapon placement, critical systems, as if they'd been studying Valkyrie vessels for decades. War Commander, we can't sustain this, Thane said, her young voice tight with fear. They're overwhelming us through sheer numbers. If we stay in formation, they'll tear us apart. Krelvan looked at his tactical display, watching as his fleet died piece by piece. 55% casualties in the first hour. Ships that had survived 8 campaigns, crewed by warriors he'd fought beside for years, reduced to drifting hulks by an enemy that fought like nothing he'd ever faced. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating superiority so complete it felt like humiliation. Order retreat, Krelvan said, the words tasting like ash. All ships emergency jump to rally point Gamma. Immediate execution. Sir, we're abandoning 6 systems. I know what we're abandoning. Sub-Commander, execute the order. The Valkyrie fleet began jumping away, ships disappearing in flashes of twisted space as they fled. The human drone swarms pursued some of them, harrying them through their jump calculations, forcing emergency exits that scattered ships across light years. The Dawnbreaker jumped last, Krelvan watching through the view screen as the human warships held position, not pursuing. They'd won 6 systems without losing a single capital ship, and now they just waited. Confident, patient, professional. Like they'd known exactly how this would play out. Space twisted, reality folded, and the Dawnbreaker emerged at the rally point 3 light years away. Other ships began appearing, 37 out of the 60 he had brought to Kepler 7. The rest were either destroyed, captured, or scattered across the frontier. 6 systems lost, 23 ships gone, and the humans had barely started fighting. Status of other task forces? Krelvan asked, dreading the answer. The communication officer looked pale. Similar reports across all the 12 colony systems, War Commander. Evacuation fleets transformed into warships. Drone swarm tactics, heavy casualties. Overall Valkyrie losses estimated at 55%. We retained control of 6 systems, lost 6. A draw then. Strategically, it could have been worse. But tactically, psychologically, it was a disaster. The Valkyrie hegemony had suffered its first major defeat in generations, and they'd suffered it against a species they thought was defenseless. War Commander, we're receiving a transmission, the communication officer said. Human origin. It's encrypted with our own command codes. Krelvan felt his skin go cold. They have our encryption. It appears so, sir. The message is flagged as priority intelligence. Should I play it? The speaker crackled, and then a human voice filled the bridge. Male, older, carrying the authority of long experience. Valkyrie forces, this is Admiral Garrett Voss of the United Human Space Forces. You have violated our sovereignty, attacked our vessels, and attempted to seize our colonies. Your aggression has been noted and answered. As of this moment, the soft power protocol is suspended by unanimous vote of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I am authorized to deploy the legacy arsenal against all Valkyrie military assets. You wanted to see what humanity looks like when we stop being polite. Congratulations. You're about to learn. The transmission ended. Krelvan stood frozen, four eyes staring at the speaker. The soft power protocol. The intelligence report had mentioned it, a self-imposed limitation on human military capability. Deliberately weaker ships, restricted weapons, peaceful doctrines, suspended. There's more, sir, the communication officer said quietly. An attached file. It appears to be a leaked Earth military document. Show me. Text appeared on the main view screen, formatted in the clean bureaucratic style of official military communication, classified, eyes-only Joint Chiefs Strategic Assessment, Soft Power Protocol, 40-year review. When humanity achieved faster-than-light travel and made first contact with galactic civilization, our warships terrified them. We had designed our vessels for the brutal realities of interstellar warfare, heavy armor, devastating weapons, aggressive tactics, refined through centuries of terrestrial conflict. The Thalcor incident proved that our military strength was incompatible with peaceful coexistence. To avoid isolation, humanity agreed to self-limitation. We would build gentler ships, restrict our weapons, adopt defensive doctrines. But we did not forget. For 40 years, we maintained the soft power protocol. Our warships were designed to appear non-threatening. Our weapon systems were limited to deterrent capability. Our military doctrine emphasized peacekeeping and exploration. During those same 40 years, we studied every species we encountered, every ship we traded with, every diplomatic exchange, every cultural mission, every scientific collaboration. We documented power systems, weapon frequencies, tactical doctrines, supply chains, command structures. We learned. Human traders cataloged military installations. Human scientists analyzed propulsion systems. Human diplomats mapped political hierarchies, all while appearing harmless, peaceful, eager to fit in. The galaxy let us watch because we seemed weak. They taught us how to defeat them and called it friendship. 40 years of observation, 40 years of analysis, 40 years of preparation. We are ready, Krelvan read it twice, then a third time. Each word was a knife blade cutting away the comfortable assumptions he'd built his entire career on. The humans hadn't been incompetent. They'd been patient. They hadn't been weak. They'd been learning. They hadn't surrendered. They'd sprung a trap. This document, Thane said slowly, it's 40 years old. According to the timestamp, yes. So they've been planning this since first contact, since before we even knew humans existed. Before Krelvan could answer, the sensor officer called out another alert. War Commander, multiple jump signatures, large vessels entering the system. The tactical display updated and Krelvan felt the last of his confidence shatter. Ships were emerging from jump space, not the disguised warships they just fought. These were different, bigger, heavier, designed without any pretense of peaceful purpose. Dreadnoughts. True capital ships, each one 3 times the size of the Vigilant. Their hulls were dark, angular, built for intimidation and violence. Weapons arrays covered every surface, and their power cores burned with the signature of unrestricted military fusion reactors. This was the legacy fleet, the warships humanity had kept hidden, the designs they'd abandoned when they adopted the soft power protocol. Ships built the way humans had originally built them before they decided to play nice with the galaxy. Krelvan counted 15 dreadnoughts, and sensors indicated more jumping in across the frontier. Weapons analysis, he said, his voice hollow. The tactical officer worked his console, then looked up with undisguised fear. Sir, those are railgun systems, electromagnetic accelerators firing tungsten carbide penetrators at War Commander. The velocity readings can't be right. What velocity? 0.3 light speed, sir. That's impossible. The kinetic energy of a projectile at that speed would punch through our shields like they weren't there, Krelvan finished, would tear through multiple ships in a single shot, would make armor plating irrelevant. Pure kinetic weapons, No exotic particles, no energy fields. Just mass and velocity, the oldest and most brutal form of warfare perfected to devastating efficiency. The galaxy had moved toward energy weapons because they were cleaner, more controllable, easier to defend against. Humanity had looked at that trend and decided kinetic weapons were more effective because kinetic weapons didn't need to penetrate shields. At point 0.3 light speed, they went through shields, through armors, through ships like a bullet through paper. His communicator chirped. The Valkyrie Council was calling. Krelvan accepted the transmission with dread. The Council of Six appeared on his screen, 6 faces representing 6 species, all of them radiating anger and fear. War Commander Krelvan, Council Leader Jarek said, his scaled face tight with fury. You assured us this would be a simple occupation. You said the humans were weak. They deceived us, Council Leader. We don't care about deceptions. We care about results. You have lost half our expeditionary force in a single engagement. The humans have capabilities we didn't anticipate. They've been preparing. Then unprepare them, another council member interrupted. Deploy the Void Breaker. Show them what real power looks like. The Void Breaker. The hegemony's planet-killer weapons salvaged from the ruins of the Gen Collective and retrofitted with Valkyrie technology. A weapon so devastating that deploying it meant accepting that peace was impossible. Council Leader, I strongly advise against. We're not asking for your advice, War Commander. We're giving you an order. The Void Breaker will jump to your position within 6 hours. You will deploy it against the human homeworld. Earth will burn and the rest of their species will surrender. Krelvan looked at his tactical display at the 15 human dreadnoughts, holding position with patient confidence, at the drone swarms still patrolling the systems they'd captured, at the meticulous organization that suggested intelligence far beyond what the Valkyrie had imagined. 40 years of preparation, 40 years of studying Valkyrie tactics, weapons, strategies. And the Council wanted him to use the one weapon the humans would have absolutely planned for. They want us to use it, Krelvan said quietly. What? The humans. They're goading us. They've shown just enough strength to terrify us, but not enough to make us surrender. They want us to escalate. They want us to deploy the Void Breaker. He met Jarek's eyes through the screen, because they have a counter for it. They've spent 40 years studying our weapons. You think they don't know about our ultimate deterrent? You think they haven't planned for exactly this scenario? The council chamber fell silent. Then what do you suggest, War Commander? Jarek asked coldly. Krelvan looked at the human dreadnoughts, at their patient formation, at the way they simply waited without attacking, without pursuing, demonstrating that they could destroy the Valkyrie at any moment but choosing not to. The message was clear. We don't want to kill you. We want you to understand. I suggest, Krelvan said slowly, that we consider the possibility that we've already lost this war. The council overruled him. 6 hours later, the Void Breaker emerged from jump space at the rally point, and Krelvan felt his stomach turn at the sight of it. The weapon was massive, a retrofit of Gen Collective technology that the Valkyrie had scavenged from ancient battlefields. It looked like a cathedral dedicated to destruction, 3 kilometers of dark metal shaped into a blade, covered in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Gen had used weapons like this to crack planets open to boil atmospheres away, to leave entire star systems uninhabitable. The Valkyrie had found this when drifting in the ruins of a dead civilization, had spent decades learning to activate it, and had kept it as the ultimate deterrent. A weapon you threatened with but never actually used. Except now, the Council wanted to use it. War Commander, the Void Breaker's captain transmitted. We have coordinates for the human homeworld. Earth, we can be in position for firing sequence within 18 hours. Krelvan stared at the weapon, thinking about 40 years of human preparation, 40 years of watching and learning, 40 years of studying every species, cataloging every weapon, planning for every contingency. Did the Council really believe humanity hadn't prepared for this delay deployment? Krelvan ordered. Maintain position at rally point. I need to confirm targeting protocols with the Council. In him was a stalling tactic and everyone knew it, but it bought him time to think. Thane approached his command station, her young face set in hard lines. War Commander, the Council's orders were explicit. We're to deploy immediately. The Council isn't here, Sub-Commander. They didn't see what I saw. What did you see? Krelevan pulled up the tactical records from the Kepler-7 engagement, running them in slow motion. 180 disguised warships transforming in perfect synchronization. Drone swarms moving with hive mind precision. Human capital ships adapting to every Valkyrie countermeasure in real time. I saw an enemy that thinks 40 years ahead, he said quietly. I saw a species that studies warfare the way we study breathing. I saw patience that makes our longest campaigns look like childish impatience. He looked at Thane. And you want me to believe they didn't plan for our ultimate weapon? Perhaps they can't counter everything. Perhaps the Void Breaker is beyond their capability. Or perhaps that's exactly what they want us to think. Before Thane could respond, alarms shrieked across the bridge. The tactical officer's voice cut through the noise. War Commander, multiple human fleets detected across Valkyrie space. They're at our homeworlds. The main view screen shifted to a strategic map of Valkyrie territory. Red icons bloomed across it like a disease, each one representing a human battle group. Krelvan counted the positions with growing horror. The 6 species that made up the Valkyrie hegemony each had a homeworld. 6 planets that represented the heart of their civilization, their culture, their identity. Human fleets now surrounded all 6, not attacking, not bombarding, just holding position in perfect blockade formations, cutting off all traffic in and out. The message was crystal clear. We can reach you, we can touch your most precious worlds, and you can't stop us. How? Thane whispered. How did they move entire fleets without us detecting them? Krelvan felt cold understanding wash over him. Because we were watching the wrong thing. We were focused on their disguised evacuation ships on the battle at the colonies. While we were engaged there, they were moving their real fleet into position. But that would require perfect intelligence, perfect timing, perfect coordination. Krelvan's mandibles clicked in bitter appreciation. Everything they've demonstrated since this started. The communication officer looked up pale. War Commander, we're receiving messages from all 6 homeworlds. Civilian traffic is being turned back. Supply convoys are being stopped. The humans aren't attacking, but they're cutting us off. A blockade, not a bombardment, not an occupation, just a clinical surgical severing of supply lines, communication networks, trade routes. The Valkyrie hegemony was being methodically isolated from its own heart, and they were doing it without firing a shot. Incoming transmission, the communication officer said. Human origin, Admiral Voss. Put him through. The view screen flickered and Admiral Garrett Voss appeared. He was older than Krelvan had expected, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of command. But those eyes were sharp, calculating, and utterly without mercy. War Commander Krelvan, Voss said. His voice was calm, professional, almost gentle. It was the tone of a teacher delivering a difficult lesson. I imagine you are considering deployment of the Void Breaker. Krelvan said nothing. Confirmation would be weakness. Denial would be dishonesty. He simply waited. Voss nodded as if Krelvan had spoken. Let me save you some time. We've been monitoring Void Breaker class weapons for 37 years. We know their capabilities, their limitations, and their vulnerabilities. If you deploy it against Earth, we will neutralize it. If you deploy it against any human world, we will neutralize it. And then we will consider the use of planet-killer weapons as an escalation that requires proportional response. You're bluffing. Am I? Voss gestured off screen, and the transmission split to show another image. It was a human warship, but not like the dreadnoughts Krelvan had seen. This one was smaller, sleeker, and surrounded by a crackling field of energy that made the sensors scream in protest. This is UHSF Absolute Zero. It carries a weapon we developed 30 years ago and prayed we'd never have to use. It generates a quantum cascade that collapses molecular bonds across a spherical radius of 5 light-years. Everything in that sphere ships planets, stars reduced to component atoms. Krelvan felt his blood freeze. 5 light-years. That was enough to destroy entire star systems, to kill billions, to render regions of space permanently uninhabitable. You're monsters, Krelvan breathed. No, War Commander. We're prepared. Voss leaned forward, his expression hardening. You scanned our ship and saw weakness. You saw gentle vessels and assumed incompetence. But we didn't build gentle ships because we're weak. We built them because we know what we're capable of. We know what weapons we can create. We know how efficiently we can kill. He paused, letting that sink in. We limited ourselves because we understand what happens when there are no limits. We've seen it on our own world. We've fought wars so terrible that we developed rules to try to contain the horror. The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Protocols, laws of warfare that exist because we needed them to survive ourselves. On the tactical display, Krelvan could see human fleets holding position around the Valkyrie homeworlds. Waiting, patient, professional. You wanted to see what humanity looks like when we stop being polite, Voss continued. This is it. We're not attacking your civilians. We're not bombarding your cities. We're not committing the atrocities that you probably expected. Because even when we fight with rules. Even when we kill with purpose. That's not weakness, Commander. That's discipline. What do you want? Krelvan asked, his voice hollow. Unconditional surrender. Complete demilitarization of Valkyrie forces. Dissolution of the hegemony. Your 6 species will govern themselves independently. Reparations of 40% of GDP for 10 years. War crimes trials for those who ordered the attack on our vessel. Each term hit like a physical blow. The hegemony would cease to exist. Valkyrie military power would be broken. Their economy would be devastated, and Krelvan himself would likely face trial. And if we refuse, then the blockade continues. Your homeworlds will run out of food in 3 months, medicine in 2, critical supplies in weeks. Your civilians will suffer, and eventually they'll force your government to surrender anyway. Voss's expression softened slightly. Or you can end this now. Accept our terms. Save your people the slow agony of starvation. You said complete demilitarization. You're leaving us defenseless. No, we're offering defense. Voss pulled up a document. After demilitarization is complete and verified, Earth will extend a defensive umbrella over former hegemony space. Any species that threatens you will face human response. You'll be under our protection. You mean our control? We mean our protection. There's a difference. We won't govern you. We won't occupy your worlds. We won't interfere in your internal affairs. But we will defend you from external threats. Consider it compensation for the fact that we're about to become the most feared military power in the galaxy. Krelvan looked at the blockaded homeworlds, at his scattered fleet, at the Voidbreaker that represented the last gasp of Valkyrie military strength. He thought about deploying it, about making one final gesture of defiance. And he thought about 40 years of human preparation, 40 years of studying, planning, anticipating. If he deployed the Voidbreaker, they would counter it. They had already told him they could. And then they would escalate, and the Valkyrie would face weapons that made planet killers look merciful. I need to consult with the Council, Krelvan said finally. You have 6 hours, Voss replied. After that, we begin humanitarian relief drops to your homeworlds. Medicine, food, water. We'll keep your civilians alive while your government decides whether to sacrifice them for pride. The transmission ended. Krelvan stood in silence, staring at the tactical display. Humanitarian relief. The humans were going to feed Valkyrie civilians while blockading Valkyrie military. It was psychological warfare of the cruelest kind, demonstrating that Earth cared more about Valkyrie lives than the Valkyrie government did. War Commander Benthane's voice was small, uncertain. What do? We end this, Krelvan said quietly, before more people die for our mistake. The council meeting was chaos. 6 species each represented by their leader, all shouting over each other in the virtual chamber. Council leader Jarek tried to maintain order, but decades of unified government were fracturing under the pressure of imminent defeat. We fight, roared the Krath representative, a massive being with armored plates. Deploy the Voidbreaker, show them we will not surrender. And doom our homeworlds, countered the Sylvari speaker, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. They have our civilians hostage. They're bluffing about their superweapon. They want us to believe they can destroy star systems because they know we'll surrender without testing it. Krelvan listened to the arguments, watched the fractures deepen, and finally spoke. They're not bluffing. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him. War Commander Jarek said carefully, "You have evidence. I have experience. I have fought 8 campaigns. I have faced dozens of species and hundreds of commanders. I know the difference between a bluff and a promise." Krelvan pulled up the tactical data from Kepler-7. "Look at their tactics. Look at their precision. Look at the way they disabled our ships without destroying them, the way they're blockading our worlds without attacking civilians. This is a species that fights with rules, with restraint, with purpose. Then why should we fear them?" "Because," Krelvan said quietly, "a species that fights with restraint when they're winning is a species that has practiced fighting without restraint. They have rules because they know what happens when there are no rules. They show mercy because they understand cruelty. And that means if we push them, if we force them to abandon their restraint, we will face something far worse than occupation." He let that sink in. "I scanned their ship," Krelvan continued. "I saw peaceful design and concluded weakness. I was wrong. They wanted me to see weakness. They spent 40 years appearing harmless while studying every species in the galaxy. They learned our weapons, our tactics, our psychology. They prepared for this war before we even knew we'd fight it. So we surrender." The Krath representative's voice was filled with disgust. "The mighty hegemony brought low by a species barely out of its cradle. We surrender to save our people. We surrender because continuing this war means watching our civilians starve while the humans feed them. We surrender because the alternative is genocide ours." Krelvan met each representative's eyes in turn. "I will not deploy the Voidbreaker. I will not escalate to weapons of mass destruction against an enemy that has spent 40 years preparing for exactly that scenario. I will not sacrifice millions of Velkari lives for pride." The chamber erupted in argument again, but Krelvan could see the calculation happening. They knew he was right. They just didn't want to admit it. Thane appeared at his side, her expression conflicted. "War Commander, you're refusing a direct order from the Council. That's treason, Sub-Commander, I know." Krelvan looked at her young face at the uncertainty there. "When I took command, I swore to protect the hegemony. I'm protecting it the only way I can now, by preventing you from making the mistake that will destroy us." "You're a coward," Thane said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Perhaps, or perhaps I'm the only one honest enough to admit we've lost." The council vote took 3 hours. In the end, 4 species voted to accept human terms. 2 voted to continue fighting. The hegemony was already fracturing. Jarek delivered the decision with visible pain. "War Commander Krelvan, you are authorized to negotiate formal surrender with the humans. Terms, as discussed." Krelvan bowed his head. "I will contact Admiral Voss." The Galactic Council chamber was older than most civilizations. It orbited a neutral star, a massive station where hundreds of species gathered to discuss matters of interstellar importance. Krelvan had been here twice before, both times as a victorious commander reporting successful campaigns. Now he stood as a defeated enemy, preparing to sign away everything his species had built. The chamber was full. Every major civilization had sent representatives to witness this moment. Krelvan could feel their eyes on him, judging, calculating. Some looked satisfied the Velkari had been aggressive neighbors. Others looked frightened. If humanity could do this to the hegemony, what could they do to anyone? Admiral Voss stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by human officers. Beside him was Captain Lyra Strand, the woman whose ship Krelvan had scanned so many days ago. She looked exactly as she had in that first transmission, tired, professional, and utterly unimpressed. "War Commander Krelvan," Voss said formally, "you come as representative of the Velkari hegemony. I come as representative of 6 species who made a mistake." Krelvan replied, his voice echoed in the vast chamber. "A mistake I initiated, a mistake I now must answer for." The surrender terms were read aloud for all to hear. Complete demilitarization, dissolution of the hegemony, reparations, war crimes trials. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Velkari power. But there were other terms too, ones that Voss had added during their private negotiations. Human medical aid to Velkari worlds, technology sharing for peaceful purposes, educational exchanges, A mutual defense pact that would protect former hegemony space from external threats. It wasn't just surrender, it was reconstruction. Krelvan signed the document with a trembling appendage. It was done. The hegemony was finished. But before the chamber could dismiss, Krelvan spoke. I request permission to address the council. There were murmurs, but Voss nodded. Granted. Krelvan turned to face the assembled representatives, meeting the eyes of beings from across the galaxy. I want you to understand what happened here. Not for sympathy, not for mercy, but so that no one else makes the mistake we made. He activated a holographic display showing the Vigilant as he'd first scanned it. This is what I saw, a gentle ship, weak weapons, defensive posture. I concluded that humanity was defenseless. I was wrong. The display shifted to show the battle at Kepler 7, civilian ships transforming, drone swarms overwhelming Valkyrie defenses, human dreadnoughts arriving with weapons that made shields irrelevant. This is what I should have seen, a species that chose restraint not because they lacked strength, but because they understood it. A species that spent 40 years studying us while we thought they were just being friendly. A species that prepared for war while praying they'd never fight it. He looked at Voss. Admiral, may I ask you a question? Voss nodded. That leaked document, the one about your 40 years of preparation. You wanted us to see it, didn't you? A slight smile. Yes. Why? Because Voss said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, we want the galaxy to understand something fundamental about humanity. We don't want to be conquerors. We don't want to be feared. But we will absolutely be prepared. He activated his own display showing Earth's military infrastructure. Shipyards producing both peaceful exploration vessels and devastating warships. Research facilities working on both medical advances and weapons technology. Training academies teaching both diplomacy and warfare. For 40 years, we built two civilizations, Voss continued. One public, one private. The public civilization emphasized peace cooperation, scientific advancement. The private civilization prepared for the day when peace would fail. We studied every species we encountered. We mapped every potential threat. We developed contingencies for scenarios we hoped would never occur. He looked around the chamber. Some of you are afraid right now. You're thinking that if we can do this to the Valkyrie, we can do it to anyone. You're right, we can. We have the intelligence, the technology, the strategic capability to defeat any species in this chamber. Fear rippled through the assembled representatives. But we won't, Voss said firmly, because conquest creates resentment. Resentment creates insurgency. Insurgency creates endless war. We learned that lesson on our own world through conflicts that nearly destroyed us. We know the true cost of empire. He pulled up another document. This is a proposal for a Galactic Security Council. Humanity will take a permanent seat, yes, but so will other species. We will share our military doctrine. We will submit to oversight. We will prove through actions, not just words, that our power will be used to protect, not to oppress. Voss looked directly at Krelvan. The Valkyrie attacked us. They threatened our people. They tried to steal our worlds. And we defeated them. But now we're going to help them rebuild. We're going to feed their civilians, treat their wounded, and ensure there is security. Not because we're weak, because we understand that today's enemy can be tomorrow's ally. The chamber was silent. That's the lesson of this war, Voss continued. Humanity is patient. Humanity is thorough. Humanity is prepared. But humanity also believes in redemption. We believe that species can change, can learn, can grow. We're offering that chance to the Valkyrie, and we're offering it to every species here. He deactivated the display. We don't want war, we want peace. But we will always, always be ready for war. Let that be understood. The Council voted that afternoon to offer humanity a permanent seat on the Security Council. The motion passed with near unanimity. No one wanted to be the species that opposed Earth. Krelvan watched it all from the observer's gallery, no longer a participant in galactic politics. Just a witness to the new order being built on the ruins of his defeat. Captain Strand found him there, standing alone, looking out at the stars. War Commander, she said quietly. Just Krelvan now, he replied. I resigned my commission. Someone else will face trial for what we did. You won't be tried, Admiral Voss intervened. He argued that you prevented escalation by refusing to deploy the Voidbreaker. The council agreed. Krelvan turned to look at her surprised. Why would he do that? Because you learn. That's all we ever wanted. Strand moved to stand beside him at the viewport. That smile you saw that day you scanned my ship. You wondered about it. I did. I was smiling because I knew what was coming, because I knew that every scan you ran, every analysis you performed was telling you exactly what we wanted you to know. And I knew that eventually you'd learn the truth. That I was prey pretending to be a predator while you were predators pretending to be prey. No, Strand said gently. That's still not right. We're not predators. We're gardeners. Gardeners. We cultivate peace. We nurture cooperation. We tend to the growth of civilization. She looked out at the stars. But we also know how to prune thorns. Krelvan felt something shift in his understanding. Humanity wasn't trying to dominate. They were trying to create an environment where domination wasn't necessary, but they were absolutely prepared to remove anything that threatened that environment. Your 40 years of preparation, he said, it never stops, does it? You're still watching, still learning, still getting ready for the next threat. Always, Strand confirmed. There are species out there we haven't met yet, threats we haven't identified, challenges we can't anticipate. So yes, we watch, we learn, we prepare. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also how we survive. They stood in silence for a moment, two beings from different worlds looking at the same stars with very different perspectives. What will you do now? Strand asked. I've been offered a position, liaison between former hegemony space and human military, helping coordinate the transition. Working for your conquerors. Working with our protectors, Krelvan corrected. I spent my career building the hegemony through conquest. Maybe I can spend what's left of it building something better through cooperation. 6 months later, Krelvan stood on the observation deck of a joint Valkyrie human patrol vessel, watching the frontier. The ship was a hybrid design combining Valkyrie sensor technology with human defensive systems. A symbol of the new relationship being built from the ashes of war. The reconstruction had proceeded faster than anyone expected. Human medical teams were still working on Valkyrie worlds treating injuries and diseases that hegemony resources had struggled with. Human engineers were helping rebuild infrastructure. Human teachers were conducting exchange programs with Valkyrie students. It was humiliating in a way, being helped by the species that had defeated you, but it was also healing. Krelvan Soy, Captain Strand's voice came over the communicator. She commanded the human contingent on the joint vessel. We're receiving priority alerts. New contact on the frontier. Unknown configuration. Krelvan moved to the tactical station. An unidentified ship had entered the border region broadcasting challenges in multiple languages. The translation matrix was struggling to parse their message, but the intent was clear enough. Hostility. Identification, Krelvan asked. Checking databases. Match found. Scar ascendancy. Aggressive expansionist civilization. Last known contact was 70 light-years from here 5 years ago. 5 years. Krelvan felt a chill. Humanity had made first contact with the galaxy 43 years ago. They'd been watching the Scar for at least 5 years. They'd been preparing. Strand appeared on his view screen. Krelvan, we have a common problem. The Scar are threatening both human and former hegemony space. I'm coordinating with Admiral Voss for joint response. We could use your expertise on Scar technology. Krelvan looked at the tactical display at the Scar vessel, testing their borders at the human ships already moving into defensive positions with smooth efficiency. What do you need? He asked. Intelligence. You've fought the Scar before, haven't you? Once, 8 years ago, they used plasma-based weapons, heavy shielding, aggressive boarding tactics. Good. We've been observing them for 5 years, but insider perspective helps. Strand's expression was serious. This could get ugly. The Scar don't negotiate. They either dominate or destroy. Krelvan understood what she wasn't saying. The Scar would learn what the Valkyrie had learned. That gentle ships weren't weak ships. That patient species weren't passive species. That humanity's restraint was a choice, not a limitation. How long have you been preparing for this? Krelvan asked. Strand's expression didn't change, but he saw the answer in her eyes. Since first contact. Since the moment they met the Scar 5 years ago. Since before the Valkyrie War even started. Humanity had been watching, learning, preparing for the next threat while simultaneously handling the current one. We're always preparing, Strand said quietly. It's what we do. The Scar vessel fired a warning shot across their bow, an act of aggression testing their resolve. Krelvan watched as the human ships moved into formation, not attacking, but making their capability absolutely clear. Weapons powered but not locked. Shields active but not aggressive. A perfect demonstration of restrained strength. The same message they'd sent to the Valkyrie months ago. We don't want war, but we're ready for it. On the tactical display, Krelvan saw more human ships arriving, and among them he recognized the configuration of Valkyrie vessels joining the formation. Former hegemony ships now under human protection, working alongside their former enemies to face a common threat. The Scar are hailing us, the communications officer reported. Put them through, Strand ordered. The view screen showed a Scar commander reptilian features arranged in aggressive patterns. Unidentified vessels. This region is claimed by the Scar Ascendancy. Withdraw or be destroyed. Strand responded with the same calm professionalism that Krelvan had first seen months ago. This region is protected territory. We recognize no claim by the Scar Ascendancy. Withdraw peacefully, or we will interpret your presence as an act of aggression. The Scar commander's expression twisted into what might have been a smile. You think you can threaten us? Your ships are weak. Your weapons are primitive. You are children playing at war. Krelvan felt a cold certainty settle over him. He'd heard those words before. He'd said those words before. The Scar were about to make the same mistake the Valkyrie had made. They're scanning us, the tactical officer reported. Deep scan. They're analyzing our weapon shields' power systems. Just like the Valkyrie had done to the Vigilant. Strand looked at Krelvan, and in her tired eyes he saw the patience of a species that had fought this battle before and would fight it again. Some lessons, she said quietly, have to be learned the hard way. The Scar would learn, eventually, just as the Valkyrie had learned, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics or their weapons. It was their patience, their willingness to wait decades to prepare thoroughly to understand their enemies completely before acting. Their ability to look gentle while being absolutely deadly. Krelvan thought about the plaque he'd seen on the rebuilt Vigilant, the one Strand had installed after the war. Underestimation is the enemy's gift to the prepared. The Scar were giving humanity that gift right now, scanning their ships, cataloging their weaknesses, concluding that they faced an inferior force. And somewhere in classified human shipyards, in secret research facilities and strategic planning sessions, humanity was preparing their response. They would wait. They would watch. They would learn, and when the time came, they would teach the Scar the same lesson the Valkyrie had learned, that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who roars. It's the one who whispers while forging a sledgehammer. Krelvan looked at the stars at the Scar vessel still broadcasting its challenges at the human ships holding position with patient confidence. He thought about his 8 campaigns, his victories, his certainty that strength meant domination. He'd been wrong about so much, but he'd learned. And that, in the end, was all humanity had ever asked for. The galaxy was changing. Species that had built their power on conquest were giving way to species that built their power on preparation. Aggression was being replaced by patience, intimidation by understanding. It would take time. There would be more wars, more conflicts, more species that needed to learn the hard way. But humanity would be ready. They were always ready. That was their nature, their strength, their promise, and their warning. The stars burned cold and distant, as they always had, as they always would. But now, watching them alongside beings who had once been enemies and were now allies, Krelvan saw them differently. Not as targets for conquest, but as gardens to be tended. And humanity, patient and thorough and absolutely prepared, were the gardeners.